For thousands of years, the vast lands we now call Russia and Ukraine were home to nomadic tribes and mysterious Bronze Age cultures. These early peoples left almost no written records, only their graves tell their story. In the endless grasslands of the southern steppe, they buried their chieftains beneath enormous earth mounds known as These ancient tombs still dot the landscape, silent witnesses to a forgotten world. The Greek historian Herodotus called these early inhabitants the fierce horsemen who roamed the steppes long before the rise of any great empire. Their culture was rich and complex, but much of it remained shrouded in mystery. Over time, these lands became a crossroads for waves of nomadic warriors, including those who played a part in the fall of the Roman Empire itself. This ancient past set the stage for the dramatic and often violent history that would follow, a story of conquest, culture, and survival that shaped the very identity of the region. But this was only the beginning. What happened next would change everything. As the centuries passed, the vast lands of the steppe saw new peoples arrive and settle. Among them were the Slavs, diverse tribes sharing language and culture but often divided by rivalry. Then came the Vikings from Scandinavia, known in the east as These fearless seafarers navigated Russia's long rivers, launching daring raids and trading expeditions deep into the heart of the land. Legend has it that the East Slavs, tired of endless tribal conflicts, invited a Varangian chief named Rurik to unite them. He accepted, establishing his capital at Novgorod. This marked the beginning of the Rurikid dynasty, which would rule for over 700 years. The people called themselves the Rus, a name that would eventually give rise to the modern nations of Russia and Ukraine. Rurik's successor, Oleg, expanded their influence by capturing Kiev, turning it into the capital of a new state, Kievan Rus. This early federation became a powerful force in Eastern Europe, blending Slavic traditions with Viking ambition. But the most defining moment came when Vladimir the Great, seeking to strengthen ties with the Byzantine Empire, adopted Orthodox Christianity. His conversion not only shaped the spiritual life of the region, but also laid the foundation for a shared cultural identity that endures to this day. Under the rule of Yaroslav the Wise, Kievan Rus reached its golden age. He was a leader who not only expanded the territory, but also brought order through law. Yaroslav codified a legal system that helped unify the diverse tribes and strengthened the state's foundations. His reign saw flourishing trade, impressive architecture, and cultural achievements that rivaled many European kingdoms of the time. Kiev became a vibrant center of power and learning, attracting scholars, merchants, and artists. The state was sophisticated, wealthy, and influential, standing as one of the most powerful in Europe. But this golden era was fragile. After Yaroslav's death, his sons turned against each other, sparking bitter conflicts that fractured the unity of Kievan Rus. This internal strife weakened the once mighty federation, breaking it into a patchwork of competing princes. Just as the state was unraveling, a far more dangerous threat loomed on the horizon, one that would change the course of history forever. The Mongols were coming. The peace and prosperity of Kievan Rus were shattered when the Mongols swept across the land. Led by the legendary Genghis Khan's successors, these fierce warriors had already conquered vast parts of Asia. Their first raid into the region ended with a brutal defeat of the Kievan princes at the Battle of the Kalka River, but they withdrew only to return with overwhelming force years later. In 1237, Bata Khan led a massive Mongol army that devastated cities and slaughtered populations. Those who resisted were burned to the ground. Novgorod, however, was spared after submitting without a fight. The Mongols established the Golden Horde, ruling from their capital at Sarai, and forced the Rus princes into vow. They demanded heavy tribute, and any defiance was met with ruthless reprisals. The Rus people called their conquerors Tatars, and lived under what became known as the Tatar yoke for over 2 centuries. This period was marked by oppression and hardship, but also by resilience. One figure who emerged as a symbol of hope was Alexander Nevsky, the Prince of Novgorod, who famously defeated the invading Teutonic Knights on a frozen lake, securing his place as a national hero. But the Mongol grip on the land was far from permanent, and the seeds of resistance were already being sown. While the Mongols ruled much of the Rus lands, a new power was quietly rising in the North Moscow, founded by Alexander Nevsky's son, Daniel. The Grand Principality of Moscow began as a small, relatively unimportant territory, but through shrewd diplomacy, strategic marriages, and military strength, Moscow steadily grew in influence and power. By the late 14th century, Dmitry Donskoy, the Grand Prince of Moscow, took a bold stand against the Mongol overlords. In 1380, he led a coalition of Russian forces to a decisive victory at the Battle of Kulikovo Field. This battle was more than just a military win, it was a powerful symbol of resistance and hope for the Rus people, showing that the Mongol yoke could be broken. Though the Golden Horde remained a threat, it began to fracture into rival khanates, weakening its grip. Meanwhile, Moscow continued to expand, annexing neighboring lands like Novgorod and asserting itself as the center of Russian power. The turning point came when Ivan III, known as Ivan the Great, faced down the Mongol army at the Ugra River in 1480, forcing their retreat and effectively ending Mongol domination. This victory marked the birth of a new Russian state, with Moscow as its heart state that would grow to dominate the region for centuries to come. Ivan IV, better known as Ivan the Terrible, was crowned the first Tsar of Russia, marking a new era of power and expansion. His reign was a mix of bold conquests and brutal rule. Ivan conquered the Tatar Khanates of Kazan and Astrakhan, extending Russia's reach deep into the Volga region and opening the way to Siberia. But his military successes were shadowed by growing paranoia and violence. Ivan's reign saw sweeping reforms aimed at modernizing the state, but these were soon overshadowed by a reign of terror. He created the Oprykhnina, a secret police force that brutally suppressed any opposition. His violent outbursts led to mass executions, including the tragic death of his own son, who was killed in a fit of rage. Meanwhile, on the vast open steppes, the Cossacks emerged, independent horsemen, living beyond the reach of central authority. They became key players in Russia's expansion, often hired as mercenaries to fight in border wars. One of their most famous leaders, Yermak Timov, spearheaded the conquest of Siberia, defeating Tatar tribes and bringing vast new territories under Russian control. Despite Ivan's harsh rule, his reign laid the groundwork for Russia's transformation into a sprawling empire. Though the country remained vulnerable to internal strife and external threats, after the chaotic time of troubles, when Russia was torn apart by famine, rebellion, and foreign invasions, the country desperately needed stability. That stability came in 1613, when the Zemsky Sopa, a national assembly, elected a young noble named Mikhail Romanov as the new Tsar. This marked the beginning of the Romanov dynasty, which would rule Russia for the next 300 years. Under the Romanovs, Russia slowly began to recover and rebuild, but the scars of the past remained. Serfdom, a system that bound peasants to the land and their landlords, was formalized and tightened, trapping millions in a life of hardship and servitude. At the same time, religious tensions deepened. Patriarch Nikon's reforms split the Russian Orthodox Church, creating a lasting schism between the official church and the old believers who resisted change. The Romanovs also faced constant challenges from neighboring powers, wars with the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, and internal uprisings, like the brutal revolt led by the Cossack Strenka Razin, tested the young dynasty's grip on power. Yet, through it all, the Romanovs laid the foundations for a stronger, more centralized Russian state, one that would soon embark on a path of dramatic transformation. Peter the Great was a ruler unlike any Russia had seen before. At just 17, he seized power and set out on a mission to transform his country into a modern European state, determined to catch up with the West. Peter embarked on a remarkable journey known as the Grand Embassy, traveling incognito across Europe to learn about shipbuilding, science, and military tactics. Back home, Peter launched sweeping reforms. He demanded that Russian nobles adopt Western customs, even imposing a beard tax on those who refused to shave. He built the first Russian navy from scratch, reformed the army, and overhauled the government to make it more efficient. His efforts weren't just about appearances, they were about turning Russia into a formidable power. Peter's military ambitions led to the Great Northern War against Sweden, the dominant Baltic power. Though the war began disastrously with a crushing defeat at Narva, Peter's persistence paid off. His forces eventually crushed the Swedish army at the Battle of Poltava, securing Russia's access to the Baltic Sea. To symbolize this new era, Peter founded St. Petersburg on the Baltic coast, a bold, ambitious city built on marshland that would become Russia's window to Europe. Peter's reign was ruthless and demanding, but it set Russia on a path to becoming a major European power. Catherine the Great's rise to power was as dramatic as her reign was transformative. Originally a German princess, she seized the throne after deposing her husband, Peter III, in a coup, shrouded in mystery and intrigue. Once in power, Catherine embraced the ideals of the Enlightenment, corresponding with thinkers like Voltaire and promoting reason, tolerance, and progress, though always within the limits of absolute rule. Her reign was marked by a remarkable cultural flowering. Catherine became a great patron of the arts, founding schools, colleges, and the Imperial Academy of Fine Arts. She amassed a vast collection of artwork that would become the foundation of the world-famous Hermitage Museum. She also encouraged Europeans to settle in Russia, helping German migrants establish thriving communities along the Volga River. But Catherine was no mere intellectual. She was a shrewd and ruthless ruler who expanded Russia's borders dramatically. Her armies defeated the Ottoman Empire, securing key fortresses like Azov and Kerch, and she annexed the Crimean Khanate, ending centuries of Tatar raids. The lands she added in the south were called Novorossiya, or New Russia, and were settled by Russian colonists under the watchful eye of her advisor and lover, Prince Potemkin. Catherine's reign was a turning point, transforming Russia into a major European empire, powerful, cultured, and expansive. The 19th century was a turbulent time for Russia, marked by wars, reforms, and growing unrest. After the Napoleonic Wars, where Russia played a crucial role in defeating Napoleon's forces, the country faced new challenges, both at home and abroad. Tsar Alexander I initially embraced liberal ideas but soon turned conservative, wary of revolutionary movements sweeping across Europe. His successor, Nicholas I, was a staunch autocrat who cracked down hard on dissent. The Decembrist revolt of 1825, led by army officers inspired by European liberalism, was brutally crushed, sending a clear message that rebellion would not be tolerated. Nicholas's reign was defined by a strict doctrine of orthodoxy, autocracy, and nationality, emphasizing the power of the Church, the Tsar, and Russian identity. Meanwhile, Russia's military ambitions continued. The Crimean War exposed the empire's weaknesses. Outdated technology, poor infrastructure, and inefficient leadership led to a humiliating defeat against Britain, France, and the Ottoman Empire. This loss shocked the nation and highlighted the urgent need for reform. Despite repression, intellectual and revolutionary movements grew stronger, setting the stage for the dramatic changes that would shake Russia in the decades to come. Alexander II came to the throne determined to modernize Russia and address its deep-rooted problems. The most dramatic of his reforms was the emancipation of the serfs. In 1861, over a third of Russia's population had been bound to the land, living in near slavery with no freedom to move or choose their masters. Alexander's decree freed millions, earning him the title, the Liberator. Yet, for many former serfs, life remained harsh. Land was limited, debts were high, and poverty widespread. Beyond serf, Alexander introduced local self-government through the creation of zemstvos, provincial assemblies with authority over education, health, and infrastructure. He also reformed the military and judicial systems, aiming to bring Russia closer to European standards. However, these changes angered conservatives and radicals alike. Revolutionary groups grew bolder, frustrated by the slow pace of reform. In 1881, Alexander II was assassinated in St. Petersburg by members of the People's Will, one of the first modern terrorist organizations. His death plunged Russia into a new era of repression, as his successor reversed many of his liberal policies. Alexander II's reign was a turning point marked by hope, progress, and ultimately, tragedy. The late 19th and early 20th centuries were a time of rapid change and growing tension in Russia. Under Alexander III, the government cracked down hard on political dissent, reversing many of his father's reforms. His reign was marked by a strict policy of Russification and harsh treatment of minorities, especially Jews, who faced violent pogroms and widespread discrimination. Thousands fled the country, seeking refuge abroad. At the same time, Russia was beginning to industrialize. Sergei Vita, the finance minister, pushed for modernization, encouraging foreign investment and building infrastructure like the Trans-Siberian Railway, world's longest railway, stretching from Moscow to Vladivostok. This massive project connected the vast empire and opened new opportunities for trade and military movement. Despite economic growth, social unrest simmered beneath the surface. Workers faced poor conditions, low wages, and little political power. Revolutionary ideas spread quickly, fueled by intellectuals and secret societies. The stage was set for conflict, as the old autocratic system struggled to contain the pressures of a modernizing society. World War I was the final strain that broke the Romanov dynasty. When Archduke Franz Ferdinand was assassinated in 1914, Russia quickly mobilized to support its Slavic ally Serbia, but the war soon turned into a disaster. Early defeats against Germany and Austria-Hungary drained the army and shattered morale. The Russian people faced food shortages, inflation, and endless suffering. Back home, unrest grew. Strikes and protests erupted in cities like Petrograd, where workers demanded better conditions and political reform. The Tsar's inability to manage the crisis, combined with the influence of the controversial mystic Rasputin over the royal family, further eroded public trust. By 1917, the situation was desperate. Soldiers mutinied, and the government lost control of the capital. Nicholas II was forced to abdicate, ending over 300 years of Romanov rule. A provisional government took power but struggled to maintain order, while revolutionary groups like the Bolsheviks gained momentum, promising peace, land, and power to the people. Russia was on the brink of a radical transformation, one that would change the world forever. The fall of the Romanovs marked the end of centuries of imperial rule and the beginning of a turbulent new chapter in Russian history. After Nicholas II's abdication, the provisional government struggled to hold the country together amid war, famine, and growing unrest. Meanwhile, the Bolsheviks, led by Vladimir Lenin, promised radical change and immediate end to the war, land redistribution, and power to the Soviets, or workers' councils. In October 1917, the Bolsheviks seized control in a bold coup, storming the Winter Palace and arresting the government. This marked the birth of the world's first communist state, plunging Russia into a brutal civil war that would last for years. The old world was gone, replaced by a new, uncertain future. This dramatic transformation reshaped not only Russia but the entire world, setting the stage for conflicts and ideologies that still echo today. Understanding this history helps us grasp the complex roots of modern Russia and Ukraine, nations shaped by centuries of conquest, culture, and revolution.